Hey, welcome back. I have another video for you where we'll be taking a look at an old world almanac. This week we're taking a look at how to build an army list. So, the army lists were probably the last thing that we had to look at. I think all we are basically missing at this point, other than faction focuses, would probably be terrain and how to build a board. I don't know if we'll get one of those articles. Hopefully we do. But at the same time, um, that almost feels like one they can do closer to release anyways, so that we have a more fresh idea in our head how to play once we're at the point where we can expect the game to come out. So let's get into the actual article now. And they start talking about how building an army is just down to selecting how many points you want to play with. And after that, you just build a list using the grand um, army lists that they have provided for us. But that 2,000 points is probably, while they don't want to, they don't seem to want to say the standard size. They point out that it's definitely a 2 to 3 hour game that's going to feel substantial with around 100 models. That sounds good to me. It's sort of where most people played for the last 20 or so years, anyways. So it kind of makes sense to me that continuing with the idea of playing at 2,000 points is probably going to be the go-to anyways for most long-term play or long-time players, sorry, or even people coming over from systems like 40K where they use basically the same point size for their games. Now, what's also important to understand before we go any further is this composition list breakdown they give us. So, composition is basically building an army following a set of rules that make it legal, is all they're talking about here. In 40K, currently, that's the whole you have to have a general and then X many units. I think it's three minimum, but that you can only have like three of any one thing unless it's battle line. Then you can have six of those, and it's a relatively simple and straightforward system with Warhammer Fantasy. Warhammer 40K, Age of Sigmar, relatively the same idea. Warhammer Fantasy is a bit more complicated, so they break it down into these four um, types of units: characters, core, special, and rare. Characters are the heroes. They're the wizards, the generals, the guys leading the army, and the ones that stand out. Then we have core. These are like our basic troops. They're the ones we're going to be focusing on building the army around. Special are the veterans, and are a little bit better and more flashy. Whereas rare are the things that you won't see very many of, but they're like elite. They're awesome units that you're going to want to use a lot of, but you do have a limited amount of space in your army to take them, so you have to be a little more picky about how you fit them in. After that, they've actually included mercenaries and allies inside the list building, it seems. In the past, these have always existed in different ways, but usually you didn't actually play with them outside of narrative games, whether that was like a campaign or some sort of special book or rule set. Here it seems like they're actually being worked into the core system of army list building. I'm fine with that. Um, I can see some problems with it. Definitely, there's going to be a little bit of gap filling with this if this is actually for everybody, and it does seem to be, because you might have an army like, say, dwarves who are very slow, but maybe they're best buddies with the Empire who have knights. That fills a gap that the dwarves themselves really can't fill by having a fast, heavy hitting unit. So you might want to put some of those into your list. Again, I do think I could see some tournaments limiting or outright banning mercenaries and allies. But as it stands, I don't know. I think it's pretty cool. It's always an excuse for me to build up an extra 500 points of a new army when I look at my Triumph and Treachery book. So seeing that as a base feature in the game is really nice. And maybe that means that the base game will have something like Triumph and Treachery built in, which would be awesome. As anybody knows, even more so than 40K, this game is really difficult to play in an asymmetrical multiplayer fashion. So, one more thing they confirm before we get into this big, beautiful list is that every faction is getting a Grand Army at release. By release, I assume they mean launch. And every faction with an asterisk, if you go to the bottom of the page, is saying that includes the PDF lists that are not part of the core factions. So Skaven, Vampire, Demons, Ogres, Dark Elves, they're all getting their own list at the start. They just won't have as much support. It's just, how it is. They focused on 9. I'm not the happiest person about that personally as a Skaven and Ogre player. Anyways, looking at the actual Kingdom of Bretonnia army list, Grand Army Composition, it's a really fancy title, which basically means this is how you build a Bretonian army. It's broken into, as I said, characters, core, special, rare, mercenaries, and allies. Mercenaries and allies, as I already said, these are just ways to add something to your list that it's lacking, or, again, as a way to build up a second army. Mercenaries, I'm guessing, are just going to be random units. There's probably going to be some more limitations in the core book about how these work, I'm sure. Allies, it's 25 points of your army going into a second army who are going to be able to be picked from another army composition list. And you can see here there's 4. It's the other 4 good guy armies. There might be some armies in the future who can't ally with anybody or with very few people, but, that's always been sort of a thing in Warhammer Fantasy anyways, and Bretonnia having allies is still pretty cool, and the fact that they can take any mercenaries is also interesting, as they used to not have that option whatsoever. So anyways, the actual 4 main ones that make up our army list, I'm going to start with characters. 50% of the army value, so if you have 2,000 points, you can have 1,000 points maximum of characters. Then, when you look at it, you can see that the options are 0 to 1 dukes, 0 to 1 barons or prophetesses per 1,000 points. You can have paladins, damsels, and sergeants at arms after that, any number. There's no limit. You can have as few or as many as your points allow. That's a pretty solid selection of characters. We already know about prophetesses and damsels. We're going to see dukes, barons, and paladins in a little bit when we get further into the article. And sergeants at arms, that sounds like a peasant character, which sounds awesome. Just somebody who's not that great, but maybe makes your peasants a little more resilient when it comes to leadership, because they're not good. They never have been. They're never going to be the backbone of a Bretonian army. But if you can make them last just a little bit longer, get your really get your points out of them, that would be cool. After the characters, we have core. 25% minimum points spent, which means if you have a 2,000 point list, you have to spend 500 points. And you can take inside the core 1+ units of Knights of the Realm on foot or mounted, and what that means is that you have to have at least 1. You can't have 0 of these guys. There has to be at least 1. After that, you can take as many as your points allow, but there has to be the 1 to start with. That's the same for men-at-arms and or peasant bowmen. Again, you have to take at least 1 unit from these 2 options. After you look at those 4 options, of which you have to come away with at least 2, the final option for core are knights errant. These are knights in training. They haven't gotten their spurs fully. They've basically not been tested in battle. They have to go into battle and earn their place as a knight of the realm. So they have to come in with the knights of the realm who take them there to the battle. And that means you can only have 1 unit of knights errant per knights of the realm, foot or mounted. These guys are always going to be mounted, I'm sure. And all this means is that if you want to take 3 units of knights errant, you need to have 3 units of either Knights of the Realm foot or mounted to counterbalance it. This is just to avoid the standard list just being full of cheaper Knights Errant who are almost as good. I assume if the stats stayed the same, which in most cases they seem to be pretty close. So, yeah, it makes sense that they're keeping a limit that is a little more restrictive in our list design, as long as you're using the basic Grand Army composition. After core, up to 50% of your points can go into special. This is just like characters. A 2,000 point army can have 50% special. Squires, questing knights, Pegasus knights, and mounted yeomen. as well as 0 to 2 units of Battle Pilgrims per 1,000 points. Battle Pilgrims are essentially fanatical peasants that walk around with a dead Grail Knight that they carry with them as a totem, essentially, which gives them like the Blessing of the Lady and some other stuff. They're quite good as a holding unit. Now it seems like instead of a 0 to 1 choice, in a 2,000 point game, you can actually have 4 units of them, meaning you can have a really cool Grail reliquary, or like some sort of like fanatical peasant army. It's kind of a cool idea. I like that a lot. And then you have the squires. Those are, I think, probably skirmishing peasant bowmen. Questing knights are just knights of the realm who have taken on the quest to find the Holy Grail, the to see a vision of the lady and become a Grail Knight. That's their quest. They put aside their lance, they take up a greatsword, and they ride off looking for monsters to fight and visions of the lady, hoping they find her and the cup. Yeah, they're just better Knights of the Realm in a sense because they always have a +2 to their strength with the great weapons. Pegasus Knights are exactly what you would think. They're Knights of the Realm that fly on Pegasus. They're probably going to be really popular this edition just because we are now getting that fancy new Pegasus character. And Mounted Yeomen, those are peasants on horses. They act as scouts and they act as chaff that you throw forward, either for redirecting purposes or to trip enemy traps like goblin fanatics. So they have a use, but it's mostly just to act as a sacrificial unit. Still useful to have when most of your units are incredibly expensive and you don't really want to throw away a 300 point knight unit. Much better to throw away a 75 or 100 point peasant unit. The last part is rare. This is up to 25% of your army's value, 500 points out of 2,000, where you can take Grail Knights and Field Trebuchets, only 1 per 1,000 points of those. Although, at 2,000 points, you can probably fit about 10 or so Grail Knights, or like a couple of small units in your list if that's what you want. I already talked about these guys in the last article that covered them, where they're just super expensive at 38 points. I think 10 of them with a command is already like over 400 points, which is pretty much the entire allotment. So you're not going to have tons of Grail Knights all over the board for anybody who was concerned about them after seeing their stats and their abilities. And yeah, that looks like the army list that I'm familiar with. They are a little bit different in 6th and 7th edition. It wasn't limited by percentage, it was limited by choices per section. But in the past, starting in 8th edition specifically, we had characters core, special, and rare with almost the exact same percentage limits. The only difference being characters used to be lords and heroes at 25% each. Now they're amalgamated into one section at 50%. That's fine, because it technically works out to be the same thing, with a little more leniency if you want to have a bit more lord or hero support in your army. You don't have to split it 50-50. You can make your character split however you feel is best. So, overall, if you're a Warhammer Fantasy player, this should look familiar. If you're a Warhammer Fantasy Bretonnian player, this should basically be the exact same list you are used to, with some tweaks like the allies and the mercenaries, and a couple of new things like the Duke and the Foot Knights. Yeah, I'm really happy with this. I also like under allies, I forgot to mention this, suspicious. This just means probably in my, with a guess, that when the units are fighting together as allies, normally what's going to happen is that they're going to work pretty well side by side unless they're suspicious. In that case, there's probably going to be like some sort of leadership modifier that makes it harder to provide support, or maybe you can't put abilities from your spells or something on each other. I don't know how that's going to work exactly, but my guess is basically what I just said, the the units won't work as well together in some way, which is cool because it does mean that, Bretonians can't just take a big block of iron breakers, which are dwarves who are probably sitting on like a 3+ armor save, um, and just, have an anvil unit that they can just sort of get into position, force the enemy to fight, and then lock them up for the entire game while the knights do whatever they want. It makes it a little bit harder for you to rely on that. So that would be my guess. And yeah, whole bunch of stuff that, they're going to say here that I've already basically covered, but I'll just read it really fast. There's a lot here to unpack. Firstly, you can't overload your army with powerful wizards and mighty heroes. Prophetesses and barons are a rare occurrence, even in the armies of the king. There is, however, the flexibility to take characters of lower ranks, paladins, damsels, and sergeants at arms. They enjoy no such limits, and you'll certainly want at least one paladin for that free battle standard bearer upgrade. In past editions, since 6th edition, Bretonnia had to take a paladin, and they had to upgrade him to be a battle standard bearer, and he came out to like over 100 points naked. Now it seems like you take a paladin and he gets a free upgrade. So that's cool. You don't have to take a BSB, but you're going to be rewarded for taking one because it's a free upgrade. Otherwise, as long as 25% of your roster, 500 points in a 2,000 point game, is spent on the units listed as core and includes one unit of Knights of the Realm and another of peasant levies, army selection is very flexible. As you'd expect, Grail Knights and Field Trebuchets aren't such a common sight, but at 38 points per model, 7 for the each member of the command, you can get just about 2 units of 6 Grail Knights and 2,000 points. Well, there we go. You can get just about 12 of them in the game if you take 2 units. But that's something that, as they put here, if you want to put all your eggs in one basket. And Dukes is something that we're now going to see. So again, I already mentioned that this is in here. Duke, Baron, Paladin, we get to see that these guys are, just like the Damsel and the Prophetess, put onto one sheet. Makes it easier to find them all without having them all over the place in the book, or even just on separate entries, because a lot of the information is shared. So, the Duke, Baron, and Paladin share movement of 4, ballistic skill of 3, and toughness of 4. After that, it's 7 weapon skill for the Duke and 6 for the Baron or Paladin, so they're pretty good fighters. They have good weapon skill with the maximum being 10. Their strength is 5 on the Duke and 4 for the Baron and the Paladin, with 4 wounds on the Duke, 3 on the Baron, 2 on the Paladin. 5 initiative for the Duke and Baron, 4 for the Paladin. 5 attacks for the Duke. So this guy's got 5 strength, 4 wounds, and 5 attacks. He's a beast. 4 on the Baron and 3 wounds on the Paladin. These are attacks. 5 attacks on the Duke, 4 on the Baron, and 3 with the Paladin, with 9 leadership for the Duke and Baron, and 8 for the Paladin. These guys are solid, every single one of them. As long as their points aren't ridiculous, this is going to be really nice to field in, whichever one you want to take. Also, the Duke, just to note, the reason he's so good, he has the Grail Vow. That means he's a Grail Knight. He has supped from the Cup of the Lady. He has taken that step towards basically being some sort of demigod. They're a regular infantry. That's super interesting. These guys don't come with horses. They come on 25mm square bases with a hand weapon and heavy armor. And you can upgrade them to have a Morning Star, Great Weapon, or Lance if they're mounted. They can take a shield. They can be mounted. There's definitely going to be a list of mounts and who can take them. And we see another one here in just a minute. And a Baron or Paladin can replace the Knight's Vow with either a Questing Vow or a Grail Vow, so you can decide the story of that character. How far along have they gotten in the quest? And they may take a single knightly virtue. Again, we don't get to see them yet, but there are 2 pages of them, they assure us. So that's awesome. And they don't cost points, it seems. They just get to pick one. A Duke can purchase 100 points of magic items. He's the new Lord in that sense. And a paladin can take 50 as a hero. The Baron, he's in the middle at 75. That's something I've never seen before outside of dwarves. So it's cool. We have something unique here where there is sort of like a, you know, hero 1.5. He's not quite a lord. He's not quite a hero. He's in between. So he gets an in between number of points for his magic items. That's pretty cool. If you don't need to, really jack up your general with magic items, the Baron might be a nice way to save points because you're going to save points here, and I'm guessing you're going to save a fair number of points dropping down from a Duke. And for special rules, the Duke has Blessing of the Lady, Rallying Cry, and Grail Vow. Rallying Cry sounds cool. Means he could probably make units rally around him a little bit better, is my guess. Baron and Paladin, Blessings of the Lady, Rallying Cry, and Knight's Vow. I guess they also have Rallying Cry. That might be like a leadership fighter character bonus. But it's probably just a case of they help allied units rally better. And these guys come with that Knight Vow, as I mentioned. Yeah, so carrying on past all this, we get to see here that the weapons are actually they're going to be provided in the core book like we've seen in past editions. They won't necessarily all just be inside the army books, meaning you'll just have to go into the core book to see what all the weapons are and what they do. A Morning Star, like we saw above, +1 strength, -1 AP for the first round of combat. Great weapons are +2 strength, -2 AP, but strike last, meaning you don't work through initiative. They just fight based on everybody else goes before them. And a lance, we've already seen, +2, -2 on the turn they charge. And with a shield, they get +1 to their armor. So, again, covering knightly virtues another time, or maybe not at all until we get our list. We get right into the Hippogriff. Now, the Hippogriff is a big, flying, monstrous mount. And as we can see here, it's got nice stats. 7 movement, 5 weapon skill, 5 strength, +1 toughness, +3 wounds, 5 initiative, 4 attacks. They actually finally confirm that our stat bonuses that say plus are actually just going to go onto our characters, meaning Hippogriff, the Hippogriff, if it's chosen as a mount by, let's say, a Duke, he does not act as a separate monster that the Duke is on. He just becomes a part of that model. And now the Duke gets +1 toughness, making him toughness 5. And he gets +3 wounds, meaning he has 7 wounds. So the Duke becomes, weapon skill 7, strength 5, toughness 5, 7 wounds, 5 initiative, and 5 attacks. The Baron is wildly good. And as you can see, the Hippogriff has its own 4 attacks at initiative 5 and strength 5. So he's no slouch either. He's going to be able to help his rider, tear up whatever they're fighting, whether it's a character in a challenge or a larger unit. Between them, there's like 10 attacks. It's pretty crazy. So it's a monstrous creature on a 50x50 base. That's the base it used to have, I'm pretty sure. So that isn't changing by the looks of it. And it has Wicked Claws, Serrated Maw, and Griffonic Pelt, which counts as heavy armor. So my guess is, in this case here, this is also going to add to the rider's armor. If he's wearing heavy armor and the mount has heavy armor, it probably goes together, meaning that the Duke now has a 3+ armor save just by sitting on this bird. It's also close order, which tells me it can join a unit. I can't recall if you were allowed to join units before with monstrous mounts, but monstrous creatures, sorry. But I don't think you could. Now you can join a unit of knights, or probably Pegasus knights, and help protect that guy a little bit. Then you have countercharge. That's the same thing we saw on the Grail Knights, where if another mounted type of unit charges it, this unit can charge back a few inches, and then they both count as charging. Fly of 9. So that's a nice 9-inch movement if it flies. Large target, that does mean that you can shoot it even if it's behind stuff. There might be other bonuses to attacking it because of large target. Stomp attacks D3. That means after all of its attacks are done, it gets a further D3 attacks at its strength of 5. Swift Stride just helps it move faster, and then Terror means that enemies might just run away from it because it's scary. So, it can have Barding for 15 points. So yeah, it just feels like maybe if this thing is, if I'm reading this right, then I think the Duke on a Hippogriff can have a 2+ save, which is really good. His shield would make it a 1+ save. So, pretty cool. And yeah, the Duke and one very fancy Baron. Don't know if they mean that you can have one Baron in your army with a Hippogriff, or if there's like a special character. But basically, the Duke and a fancy Baron get a Hippogriff, and they are just as awesome as I said they were. And then we also get to see Peasants, the men-at-arms. They're not good. And that's fine, because they're not supposed to be good. They're supposed to be there as cannon fodder. They're just there to fill, ranks and make you have a unit that's not just cavalry, that you can basically throw away and not feel bad. Sometimes you just need to throw a unit at an enemy and roadblock them for 1 or 2 turns. And these guys, because of the changes to how they work, are going to be really good for that. So their stats are pretty poor, as I said. Movement's 4 across the board for all tiers. They all have 2 weapon skill. They all have 2 ballistic skill. They have standard strength and toughness of 3. They have 1 wound, 3 initiative on the men-at-arms and the yeomen against standard humans. The Grail Monk's a little slower at initiative 2. And then it's 1 attack for the yeomen and 2 attacks each for the... 1 attack for the men-at-arms and 2 attacks each for the yeomen and Grail Monks, with 5 leadership on the men-at-arms, 6 if one of the 2 champions are there. 25mm bases, regular infantry, 10+ models, hand weapon, polearm, light armor, and shield, just like they were armed since 6th edition. And yeah, it's 7 points for a yeoman, 7 points for a monk, 5 points for a standard bearer and a musician each, and 25 points to upgrade the monk with a blessed triptych, which we'll see how that works in a minute. And they have close order, horde. Not happy to see horde. That was kind of a killer rule, and not a good killer rule. Like, that was a game killing rule in 8th edition. But maybe if it's limited to really junky units, horde won't be that bad. After that, we have levies, peasantry, shield wall, and warband. And we'll see what some of those do as we go down. So, the Blessed Triptych, this thing's awesome. It's probably worth the 25 points. Basically, it gives the unit Stubborn, and while Stubborn used to be never take a leadership test that's modified, it has changed. It's a significant change, which is unfortunate, but I can see why, because it does mean that your unit is good at holding for 1 turn, but it's not going to sit there the whole game and stall the entire enemy army because you have one big block of guys that just won't run away, even if they're losing. So what it does now is that the first time they take a break test, they don't roll the dice. All they do is fall back in good order. And because they have shield wall, this allows them to give ground instead of falling back. They basically are going to take a charge, lose that combat almost every time because, again, they're not great. But all that's going to happen is they're going to shuffle back an inch or 2, hold their position. Even if they fall back like 5 or 6 inches, they're just going to hold their position once they get there, and they're still going to be ready to fight. They're not going to be fleeing, meaning they're going to still be available to use on your next turn. So that's a really nice unit. I can see a lot of use for these guys, and I think everyone who plays peasants are going to be really happy with them, especially if that monk is available. And next we get Armies of Infamy. So Armies of Infamy, they mentioned them up above, but I didn't want to talk about them because it wasn't being explained at the time. All this means is that you get your Grand Army list, but each faction that's in the core are going to have infamy lists. These are just different ways to play your army. So, for example, as a Bretonnian lord, you might wish to enter exile, especially as it means you can then take forbidden border prince bombards into battle. While those who really just enjoy knights, and more knights may prefer errantry crusade. In 6th edition, army books had lists that were in the back of the book. These were basically just different ways to play your army. So, Empire might have a Marienburg list, Vampires might have a von Karstein list, and for this army, the Bretonians, they didn't actually have one. This was a late edition army book, and they didn't get the extra list printed. They were later on added in campaign books like the errantry list. And what that was, for those who were curious, it was an army built just around knights errant. You could have other stuff, but the knights errant were your main unit. Knights errant, for those who don't know, are, again, knights that are in training, but occasionally, because they don't want to wait for a battle where they can prove themselves, a bunch of them will get together and pick a target, and they'll all go together to go attack that target and sort of just force their lords to recognize them and give them their rank of Knight of the Realm. So, seeing this stuff here, again, is really nice. It gives you a lot of extra fluff and sort of just like cool ways to build your list to make it unique. And especially, I really like this Border Prince Bombard idea. My guess is it just means you can take Empire cannons. Part of me hopes that it also means that there's a Bombard kit being made that's going to be released. But yeah, the point is, though, you won't just be playing against other Bretonian armies that are the same as yours every time you match up. They might be playing something different, or you might be playing something different than the standard list. So it's really cool to see this. I'm really happy that that's being added in. And this article, there was a lot to talk about, so I feel like this video is very long. I need to stop it here. But we've covered everything that's important. They have no article next Monday because it's Christmas, but they promise an off-white Christmas on the 26th, the next day. I think what's actually happening, and this is the last thing I'm going to talk about before I forget, I actually think that this is our first faction focus article. I think because Bretonnia has already had so many different parts of their army presented to us over the past several weeks. We saw different parts of the Bretonian list presented to us already. So we already know enough about Bretonnia that we probably don't need a list, an article that's just going to talk about them. And I feel like next week we're going to get a faction focus on the Tomb Kings. And that'll be the first of 8 faction focus articles. And it'll be 9 if you count all the stuff we've learned about Bretonnia. So yeah, I think we're at the countdown. I've been saying for a while it was a 9-week countdown once we got the first faction focus. I never considered how much information had been given already for Bretonnia. I think this was it. I think next week we're going to get the grand army list for Tomb Kings, and it's going to carry on like that week after week. So yeah, I think we're in the countdown. I think that our pre-order window starts around the 10th of February. It's going to go till the 17th, and then it's going to launch on the 24th. I think the 24th of February is when we're going to see the release of Old World. Anyways, I've really drugged this out, and I'm going to let us end here. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any thoughts or comments, leave them down below. And as always, have a great day.